Okay, so now we're going to have a look at what is strategy. By this point, I hope you have some understanding in your own head what you think strategy is and what ideas go into strategy and some concepts. And it's true to say there's quite a lot of different definitions and feelings about what actually constitutes strategy, what is strategy. And so I think it's very important for everyone to clear this up, to get it clear in your minds what it is. And so the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to look at some of the concepts, some of the ideas that people push forward to say what they think strategy stands for. And it's fair to say that there's quite a number of concepts that people think of strategy, and these include things. It can be a collection of approaches, which simply means that there can be strategy is simply a case where people do a certain number of things. Maybe they think you have heard of the 5 P's, or you often somebody say like the 4 S's, etc. And these are these ideas: place, product, promotion, principle. There might well be, and there are various numbers of these. I don't think that, and they put them together and they say this collection of different actions and they say this is strategy. And that's one way of looking at it from a definition of it. It's not the way that we would normally think of it as being strategy. So what is strategy then? Well, there are other ways of doing it as well. Some people think it's the plan. It's just having a long-term plan, having a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, a 20-year plan. Then that is strategy. But of course, that can be part of strategy, but the plan itself isn't the strategy. Strategy isn't the plan. In fact, there are many issues in which people can think that this can actually be a problematic way of approaching strategy. It's all right to have a plan, and many people make comments about the importance of having a plan and do like that. Dwight Eisenhower said that actually he didn't think that plans actually made a great effect in military planning, but actually not having a plan was a problem, even though the plan itself might not come off. But it's useful to have some idea of what it is you're doing. But the plan itself is not the strategy. But other people actually see strategy as a power grab. The idea is instead of strategy actually being something that is done for the good of the organisation, it is done by individuals in order to cement their own power. And by that I don't mean they have a strategy for obtaining power. They have a simple model which says that having strategy is what gives you power. If you're the person who makes the strategy, you are powerful. The idea comes from the fact that if you look at organisations, most strategy is very top down. Strategy comes from the powerful in the organisation. Therefore, it makes sense to think that actually, if strategy comes to the powerful in the organisation, then if you can make yourself the person who writes the strategy, de facto, you will become powerful in the organisation. On top of this, the strategy actually can be seen in a negative sense. Some people say it's a straitjacket or it's a method. You have a way to say, we have a series of proposals at this organisation, we always do things this way. And that can be useful, it can keep you on track, but it also can be very, very problematic. It becomes a really strict straitjacket that stops you going forward and stops you being flexible and stops you achieving much. And on top of that, some people say actually the strategy is the organisation's culture and values. It's the way we put the organisation together. It's what we believe in. It's what's important to us. That is the strategy. And there are certain things that we will do and there are certain things we won't do. And it doesn't matter what our objectives are so much as the end never justifies the means. The means must always be something that's acceptable to this organisation. So that's one way of looking through it. Doing that. So what do we think of strategy? Well, what I want is what do we want to do about strategy? And on the teaching that I give you, I always think there are 2 important things to learn about strategy. On that they are, we introduce you to what you'll need to know about strategy to get a seat at the table. And this is about becoming a strategist. This is about becoming one of the people who gets to make decisions. So it's about going to the job interview and being able to talk about doing SWOTs and pedestals and analysis and like that. In regards to when we think those are effective ways of doing strategy, it's important that you can do these so that you can get that place at the board, you can get that seat at the table. And we call this oikonomicus strategicos, which is a very, very important way of you looking at the way you do things. It's a very important way of you actually building thing up, because this is how you get through the door. However, we'll argue throughout it that this is not the best way of doing strategies. There are 2 educators. We'll teach you how to get a seat at the table, but we'll also try and show you how can you become a successful strategist. And I use a different model for that, and I use that as anastastikos strategikos. And that is a way of becoming a thinker. It's a way of becoming a reflective, strategic thinker who thinks about the way things are done and therefore can build up a good picture of what's going forward and can make imaginative, can make narrative, and can make decisions that are not tied into a straitjacket. And that's what I think is the important part of strategy, understanding these 2 aims. how to become a strategist, to understand how strategy is done, and then how to overcome that to a certain extent and do strategy in an effective and appropriate manner. Okay, so just to be clear, what do I mean by economic and strategic goals? Well, there's a standard model in economics, a very standard model in economics, in which we talk about the way people are used to doing things. And we actually talk about what we call the economic model of man. It's a very old model, so I'll use the phrase man because they did use the phrase man. It's very much based around the idea of thing. And what it said was that people make economic decisions based on being totally rational. So they will be very, very logical. They'll think it through like Mr. Spock of Star Trek, and you'll think it through and you'll make your decisions. And in doing so, you are utility maximized. You're working out what is best for you, and you'll take no notice of what other people want. It reflects on the fact that you have ideas of perfect knowledge. You know and understand what's going on around you, so you make your decision based on perfect knowledge. And it also makes the idea you are very self-interested. So you are rational, you maximize your utility, you do so with perfect knowledge of your surroundings, and you do total self-interest. Now, all of economic models are based on this, and most strategic models are based on economic models, the kind of industrial economics that gave rise to things such as Porter, Five Forces, etc., and things like that. But I ask you a simple question. Imagine this as a Tinder biography. Now, if this is a Tinder biography, would you swipe left or right? I leave, just to clarify, right is saying that you do not want to go on a date with this person. Left is saying, oh, I'm going to save this person into my favourites, and I might consider going on a date with them. So would you consider going on a date with Economicus Strategicus? Because think about it, what is this person like? They are totally rational, they maximize utility, they are self-interested, and they know everything. Well, actually, this is the biography of a sociopath. So we're doing a simple fact that all economic models are based on thinking of people as sociopathic and doing sociopathic things and working together on sociopathic ideas. So we're building up this model doing that. So I think it's important that we challenge this and we look at this. And so, illustration of what we mean by different approaches to strategy. I'm going to take, we are the public sector, and I apologise for the fact we often end up with military models, but it's one of the histories that are most widely available. So I'm going to look at a critical public sector case. This is a case based in a country called Vietnam. It's about two countries, two sides that clashed violently in Southeast Asia. We call this the American War in Vietnam because it's and on one side you have the US military. It's the first MBA war. The graduates of the top US universities, experts in analysis strategies, the first time in which they applied these analytical tools directly to military things. They had been applied before, but it was the first time being educated by that. So it's seen as the first MBA war. And so on one side you have the quite classic Economicus Strategicus with a command of a large army, helicopters, tanks, etc., guns. On the other side you have a peasant force. Now, interestingly enough, the peasant force were quite educated, not the peasants themselves, but their commanders. Many had been to the Sorbonne in Paris, and they'd studied philosophers and historians. They've schooled the historical works of Sun Tzu and other philosophers, and also read the works of Mao of the day. And so they went on to fight against that. And these are kind of a series of models of the Anastaticus Strategicus. Okay, so sure, the outcome is a foregone conclusion. Surely it's clear who's going to win. But actually, history tells us that that is not what happened. Of course, that the peasant force triumphed. And the reason for that, the reasons why the American War in Vietnam ended the way it did, is, as the Phan Phong Dong, the Vietnamese PM, said, the US is the most powerful nation on earth, but they don't like long, inconclusive wars. We can outlast them and win in the end. They understood the environment in which they operated, not just the paddy fields of Southeast Asia, but they understood the environment more of America. They understood that as the war went on, more and more people in America would react to it and would push back against it. There were more and more campaigns against the war, more and more people marched against the war, more people protested against the war. It's part of a general crisis of US capitalism that the war helped to bring about. So what was GEOP strategy based about? Well, firstly, it was about unity. GEOP is often spread as communist, but actually his initial issue was about that, saying anyone can be involved in the resistance as long as they're prepared to fight and are opposed to the US president. On the other side, the US had numerous objectives and subjectives. Were they propping up the South Vietnamese government? Were they trying to stop the spread of Soviet communism? Were they actually about stopping the domino theory? So they didn't have this kind of unified idea. They just had lots of things. And when they talked to different people, that. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of people back in America became opposed to the war, because they didn't know what they were fighting over. If you don't know what you're fighting over, you don't know what you're standing. It doesn't have to be about war, you will start to struggle. Giap understood the broader environment. He stood off, like I said, the nature of the Soviet these battlefields, but he also understood the political problems that America would develop. He knew he could keep his country together, but at the same time, the importance of public perceptions. In the US, people start to see that they were losing. So there's the famous Tet Offensive, which was actually a military disaster for the Viet Cong. They lost so many troops, and the Americans felt quite successful. But the image of suicide bombers overrunning the US embassy, broadcast on the world news at night, was enough to start to turn the tide in America. So although they lost the battle, they were coming towards winning the war. He understood that his troops and arms were equipment, but he knew their morale was higher and their loyalty was greater, and he knew how to use them. So, for instance, he knew how to resupply people via the backs of donkeys through the jungle paths in a way that actually the Americans couldn't do with all the greater equipment, because they didn't understand. And he understood effectiveness. It is always more important to be effective than to be efficient in any strategy. Efficiency is fine as far as it goes, but all the efficiency in the world will not help you. In fact, some people say if you're ineffective, the more efficient you are, the worse it will be. So it's important to be effective. And Giap made sure that people saw him as someone who was prepared to take the difficult decisions, prepared to make things that. You'll see this in the work of Sun Tzu. He regularly talks about the importance of generals being willing to make the difficult decisions, to make the calls, to show how important it was important for that. So it's very, very important that we look at this and see actually what's going on. Eventually, of course, after decades of war, 1975, we saw a victory for that, because Sun Tzu, that Giap achieved the greatest type of victory, the enemy just gave up. The US Army claimed they never lost a battle, but the point is, it doesn't matter. If you don't, you can win all the battles if you lose the war. And the truth is, they lost the war. Even in the peace treaties at the end of it, when they were negotiating in Paris, several US soldier officers made a clear point to the Vietnamese, saying, "You never defeated us. We never lost a battle." The Vietnamese generals simply replied, "Yes, but you lost the war." The truth is that you didn't need to win the battles. They forgot what they were fighting for. And we see some movement away from this now in Afghanistan, where the US have actually argued that they will no longer do body counts. Some people take this in quite a cynical and horrible way, not talking about they don't care about how many they kill, but what they're actually saying is they have recognized from Vietnam that actually counting the wrong things using this kind of economic model doesn't work. So now they no longer do body counts. They lost the war. Like I said, known as the First MB War, they are measuring the wrong things in doing their body counts. What's interesting is that this three-stage strategy has proved successful only in countries where the enemy had somewhere to go, where the enemy could just give up and go home, but not as much when the enemy was already at home. So it failed across much of Latin America. Though in Cuba, there were the special circumstances and the government were able to retreat to the United States and continue from there for a long period of time, it succeeded. But most places, it didn't, because they couldn't achieve this victory of the enemy just giving up and going home. So we've seen now recently how it's failed in Afghanistan for the US again, and the question now is what's going to happen in Iraq. So here, tanks inside 55 entering the presidential palace in Saigon. So during this course, we'll look at a large number of models. We'll look at things like SWATs and TOWs. We'll look at Maslin. We'll look at Ostrich. We'll look at 5 forces. There are many more. And when we're looking through these, we're going to ask ourselves these questions. Are these models important? And the answer to that actually is no. The process is important, not the model. And the fact of this is lost on many management consultants. Saying jokingly from the average language assessor to be consultant is to con and insult. And so we use a phrase, printed the decision George Box, a very common phrase you'll see throughout any of my teaching around these sort of management theories, management models, strategic planning, is that all models are wrong, some models are useful. So to do strategy, all you need is to have a vision and a mission, clear objectives. You have to know yourself honestly. You need to know your opposition. Do these, then you will succeed. And that is why if you're studying on any of my modules, on any of my courses, you'll discover you're asked to reflect and critical rather than just write an essay. Okay? You don't just do a how-to guide and applying the tools. The important thing is to learn to think and learn to operate for yourself. But full disclosure at this point, not all organizations do strategy. So why do some organizations not do strategy? That is, some organizations do not do strategy because they're too busy firefighting. Some organizations do not do strategy because they see it as a waste of time and a waste of money because they say it is too expensive. Some organizations just are laziness, they're just too busy, etc. And some organizations are content with success and they're too comfortable. So don't not automatically assume that every organization will have a strategy. They will often have some form of strategy and if they claim not to do it, but in general there are plenty of organizations that will not actually go forward with that. Okay, well, thank you for listening. I hope we can use some ideas about the nature of strategy and why it might not be quite what you thought it was.